This is a continuation of another lecture, another talk in the Native American Church of the Ghost Dancers. I am Chief Clifton A. Duddle. My wife is Anampishi A. Duddle. We are the officers in this church. We are both federally recognized American Indians, and our church is a federally recognized Native American church chartered pursuant to the American Indian Religious Freedom Act. Yesterday I was speaking a little about my background, and I'm going to continue with that in that vein, so that, here, let me adjust this a little bit, so that we can have we can have a general background and how we came to become officers in and pursue a path of spiritual awakening and wisdom teachings in indigenous peoples' ideologies. So when I left off yesterday, I was talking about when I left northern Oklahoma, where I was raised as an adolescent, and I came to California at age 13, 14 years old, and then I started going to the University, USC, at age 16. And that was in 1967. And in the next year, in the fall semester of 1968, because I had been raised and exposed to indigenous peoples' traditions of intertribal traditions in what was formerly Indian Territory, and now it's the state of Oklahoma. I'd never really been exposed to the Southwest indigenous traditions, nor the Western West Coast Meso-America or Mexican traditions as much, although they have also similar sacramental traditions to the Gulf Coast, which as someone from the Southeast Ceremonial Complex, Choctaw, Chickasaw, I should explain that even though I'm enrolled as a Choctaw, I also have a lot of Chickasaw blood, and I have Chickamauga Cherokee. My wife also enrolled as a Choctaw. Both of us are 1/4 blood quantum. She's also Chickamauga Cherokee. We both descend actually from the same Chickamauga line, the line of Doublehead. There's three basic lineages in the Choctaw. There's the Moshlatubi lineage, which I descend from, and the Pushmataha lineage, which my wife Anampishi descends from, and then there's the Apukshanubi lineage. And these were the names of the three chiefs during the removal period in the Indian Territory. They have older names. The Apukshanubi was called the Oklafalaya because they lived along the Mississippi Valley, which is called the Long Man. Oklafalaya means long people or long men, because the Mississippi was called sometimes the Long Man. The Oklatanap was the Moshlatubi lineage, also sometimes called the Potato Eaters or Ayupit. And they lived back more in the central area there. And these were the one. This lineage was the one that the traditional Minko or kings of these palisaded mound centers came from. And then the Pushmataha lineage was sometimes called Oklahanale, because they were from the six towns from the south, from the lower Mississippi Valley and Louisiana. New Orleans, for example, was originally a Choctaw settlement. And Pushmataha is that from that lineage. And I'll talk more about the historical aspect of these three lineages. as we move forward in these talks. But they were a Gulf Coast culture, this Southeast ceremonial complex, and they're closely related with the Gulf Coast cultures of Mexico, such as the Toltec, Aztec, Mayan cultures. They're more closely related with them. They built mound centers and pyramid centers and what have you, like the Meso-Americas. I should say that the term Meso-America is sometimes, and the cultures are sometimes equated with the cultures of South America. Meso-America is part of North America. Meso-America composes Mexico and Central America. That's all part of North America, and they're related to the Southeast ceremonial complex in the southern United States, their culture. South America is a different continent. So Mexico is part of North America. It's not part of South America. Like some people think. I don't know why they think Mexico is part of North America and not part of North America. They think it's part of South America, but that's completely untrue. And it's closely related to the cultures of the United States and the Southeast. So, but as you move west to the West Coast, across the Barranca de Cobre, there's this mountain range. It's kind of an extension of the Rocky Mountains. It goes down into Mexico, called the Barranca de Cobre, the Tarahumaras. West of that, you have the Tarahumaras and the Yaquis and the Huicholes. So I'd never really been exposed to that until I came to California. And a prime exposure to that was when I was 17 years old, and I was in my semester, my fall semester at USC, and I decided to take a social anthropology class. I never really had a major per se. I switched my majors from time to time because my perspective on going to college since I was university, because I was homeschooled, was to gain knowledge. I didn't really understand the concept of the capitalistic colonial system that really, to get one of these, a lot of people go to the university to get a degree because it's like a certificate of employment. I was actually going there to gain knowledge, so I would just switch around from class to class. And some of the classes were science classes, some math classes I would take, a lot of humanities classes, psychology and religion and anthropology classes I was taking, because that's where my real interest was. But I did take, I think, one or two economics classes. I learned basic accounting skills, how to set up a chart of accounts and all this, and how the businesses were done here. So that was all kind of part of my general education that I'd never really been exposed to because I was homeschooled in Oklahoma. And my intent was to gain knowledge, to gain wisdom. That's always been my intent and still is. It's to gain wisdom and to evolve my spirit rather than trying to gratify my creature appetites and my ego and obtain a certificate of employment so I could be working this debt servitude kind of capitalist colonial system. Indigenous people are sort of anti-colonial because they were decimated by colonialism. So that was sort of something I didn't want to participate in, or didn't at least have the perspective to participate in. So in any case, in my fall semester, 1968, I decided to take a social anthropology course. And the campus at USC is like, I guess it would have been the southeastern end of the campus. It was this tall building where it was given, called the Waite Phillips Building. And it was given down in the basement, this social anthropology course, almost like it was almost like it didn't have any windows. I remember I went in there, it was like a tomb, but there was a big screen where the teacher could project these slides up on the screen. It was kind of a unique kind of experience in social anthropology. The teacher was a grad student. She'd just gotten her degree in her undergraduate degree in anthropology. And a lot of times they had the grad students teach courses in preparation for getting their postgraduate degrees. This woman was named Barbara Meyerhoff, and she had assigned text in the class, traditional social anthropology text from Durkheim and Bronislaw Malinowski. One of the texts was called, his text was the Sexual Life of Savages. I remember that text. It was about the Trobriand Islanders and their kind of indigenous people's beliefs in the Pacific Islands, in the Trobriand Islands. But that wasn't what the main bulk of the class was about. It was about her doctoral thesis that she was doing on the Huichol Indians and their peyote hunt from Nayarit. And they had this, it was a little different, and that was kind of very interesting to me because their sacrament was peyote too. But they had to do this long journey to San Luis Potosi, to these peyote gardens in the eastern, more towards the Gulf area of Mexico, in order to gather the peyote. And they went on this hunt every year to do this pilgrimage. I think her informant was a man named Juan Medina Silva. He was what was known as a Mara Akame. And so she went on this peyote hunt, and she had all these slides of this peyote hunt that she went on with in this pilgrimage. And they would go and they would hunt this magical blue deer called Cayamari. And it was very much like hit a familiar chord with what I had learned about Masingwa and the sacredness of the animal nations and how they can open up great corridors of awareness to you. It also had to do with the interaction of being embraced or accepted by the spirit of peyote. There's an actual entity or spirit that resides, or the corridor is opened up, and you can meet this entity, and it can give you great wisdom teachings. So what they would do is they would go to San Luis Potosi on this pilgrimage, and they would hunt Cayamari, and then gather the sacrament for the year and take it back to northwestern Mexico, north central and northwestern Mexico, in Nayarit. And that was my first exposure to this Huichol peyote hunt. This was in 1968, and through this slide presentation. That's what most of the class was about. The other principal assigned text that she had was a grad student similar to her, who was a grad student at UCLA across town, and in anthropology, social anthropology. And his name was Carlos Castaneda. And he had written this book. I think I got one of the first editions. It was an assigned text in a class called The Teachings of Don Juan. And he actually came into the class, and I think he gave a little talk. I was able to interact with him a little bit. And what later he gave, back in the 80s, I think I met him again, and he lived in Westwood, close to the UCLA campus. And he gave a little talk in Santa Monica at the Psychic Eye bookstore where I live in Venice, so I live adjacent to Santa Monica. And so it was very close for me to go and listen to that talk again. But I really didn't know too much about the southwestern Indians of northern Mexico and the Southwest until I came into that class, and I started to see the similarities between native peoples across the continent, from in the United States, Canada, and Mexico. And so um, um, let me say a little bit about Castaneda. He, subsequent to that period in 1968, he went on to write in the 70s some more books about his experiences with this Yaqui shaman, this Yaqui man of knowledge by the name of Juan Matus, who he met in Tucson, Arizona, at a bus station. And that was the story he told. Now, a lot of people have exposed that as being fabrication and a fiction. However, the way he described his experiences hit a familiar chord with me because I sort of experienced similar things myself in the capacity of my being Native American and being involved in Native American traditions in Oklahoma. However, my take on it was that Don Juan was not one single individual, but it was a collection of individuals that he sort of cobbled together as informants throughout his period of investigating social anthropology among indigenous Americans of the Southwest. And the reason I say this is he had originally, before he came to UCLA, had been a anthropology student at LA City College. And his primary, he didn't know a lot about peyote. He certainly did, or the Native American church ceremonies. He seemed to know more about dechura, or jimson weed, dechura. And in Mexico, it's called toloache. And it's actually an entheogen that was used by the Aztecs. The Aztecs used four main entheogens. The great entheogen, the great sacrament, is peyote. And then they used teonacatl, which are the psilocybin mushrooms, which are used today by the Mazatecs, and I'll get into that a little more later. The other one is the datura, which is that's called toloache. And then the other one besides the peyote was the ololoyuki, which is a form of morning glory. It's like the DMT. These were the three main entheogens that they used besides peyote, which is the fourth. It was like the master. So anyway, the way that he described his first introduction to peyote was in a sort of an extemporaneous, what's known as a mitote, which is kind of a gathering of just people. It wasn't a traditional Native American church ceremony, but it was sort of like, and they didn't have the altar. They passed the peyote bag around like they did, but they didn't sing the peyote songs. They didn't have a drummer and a cedar man and a fireman or a central fire. It was more extemporaneous just around a round table. However, in his experience, he was completely embraced by the spirit of peyote. And the corridor was opened up by a canine spirit for him, which had implications for me as a Choctaw, because we have this magical being among the Choctaw that leads and guides us called Ofi-Tokpi, Ofi-Aishtolo. And the he opens up the corridors to the stars called the Ofi-Tokpi Hasimbish, which is the Milky Way galaxy. So his initial experience with this canine spirit opening up this corridor resonated with me. Beyond that, even though he didn't experience it in a traditional Native American church ritual altered ceremony with the officers and what have you, which to some people is very necessary. Some of the founders in the Native American church originally had great visions that they established the church upon, such as John Wilson, who was embraced by the spirit of peyote without the traditional or conventional altar and ceremony and what have you. So it's not always necessary, if the spirit of peyote finds worth in you, to embrace you and give you great knowledge and awareness without the traditional ceremony. For some reason or other, he apparently found Castaneda, and this was substantiated by Juan Matus, the Yaqui shaman. Now, later I learned that a lot of the information that Castaneda transposed, I think he had legitimate informants. Some were native, some were ancillary to native communities, or some were perhaps Mexican people that were studying native herbology or native traditional medicines. And he had these informants. His initial informant knew a lot about Datura, because that's what he seemed to know the most about. And he'd studied that and written papers about it when he was a student at LA City College, before he transferred to UCLA as an anthropology student, and then got his undergraduate degree. And he was in the process of doing kind of what Barbara Meyerhoff was at USC, teaching these courses and going on and getting his postgraduate degrees in anthropology. Subsequent to that, he indeed did write 2 books called Separate Reality and Journey to Eastland. Journey to Eastland was essentially his doctoral thesis, that he got a doctorate in anthropology. So in any case, my take on Castaneda is that his informant, he had a series of informants. The information that he transposed was principally of an indigenous people's kind of background, but it wasn't exactly as he describes it. Some of it was cobbled together from various sources and made into this dissertation that he utilized to get his doctoral thesis, and then go on to become an author that was able to sustain him in a fairly nice lifestyle as a well-known author through the 60s and 70s. So anyway, that was sort of my introduction to the natives of northern Mexico and the Southwest. Later, I went and lived in Mexico, and I even lived in South America for a time, and I got to know more about the native cultures of Mexico and the Southwest. So in any case, I went on and I studied at the university. I was, at the time I was studying, it was in the later 60s. And this was kind of a time of turmoil with the Vietnam War. It was raging at that time. And there was a conscription, a draft. And even though I was able to exempt myself from the draft because I had what was known as the 2S deferment. If you made, I think, a B average and you were in a major university with a B average or more, you could apply for this 2S deferment and not have to register for the draft, or you get a draft card that had this exemption on it. And I was a war protester because my viewpoint was that I certainly was historically disagreed with colonialism, and that some people should be relegated to subhumanity and genocided, which is what I thought had been done to Native Americans. So I wasn't going to participate, go halfway around the world and participate in the genocide and the confiscation of other indigenous people's resources halfway around the world. It would have been the ultimate hypocrisy as an indigenous person if I was against it here to participate in it on the other side of the world. So what precipitated, I think, as I recall, thinking back in those days, the Vietnam War, I participated in some debates about it because I was sort of a war protester and kind of a leader on campus of some of the war protests, that the Gulf of Tonkin, which sort of escalated the war in Vietnam, I said I felt it was orchestrated by the oil and drug companies and certain intelligence groups in the CIA as a pretext to escalate this war in Southeast Asia. And indeed, later it was exposed by no less than Robert McNamara, the Secretary of Defense at the time, said, yeah, that's indeed the case. It was sort of an orchestration. It was sort of exposed as such. So I felt that I was correct in my surmise that the war in Vietnam was an improper pretext to disenfranchise indigenous people and confiscate their resources, somewhat similar to what had been done here in the Americas for 500 years against the Native Americans. So as someone who stood forth for the rights of indigenous people, I didn't feel like I could, in good conscience, participate in anything like that, and actually had to stand up and expose, from my perspective, what I felt to be true. I might add that that's kind of been the hallmark of my life and that of my wife, is that what we're not here to judge anybody. We're probably the most accepting of, well, not accepting, but we're not judgmental. We're the most non-judgmental. I try to be non-judgmental and not put my ego into saying that what I believe is right or wrong. I'm not saying that, from my perspective, I think categorizing certain people as subhuman and then genociding them, from my perspective as an indigenous person, that's wrong and it's terroristic. I think most racism, I'll speak about, that's a huge lecture in and of itself, a huge subject, racism in and of itself. And it has a lot to do with colonialism and identity crisis. So, but I'll get into that much later in these lectures. But just going back to my own personal situation at that time, I was against the disenfranchisement and colonialism and the disenfranchisement of indigenous people. I was against categorizing certain people as subhuman or their culture as subpar and using that as a justification to genocide people, groups of people or nations of people or ethnic groups of people. I thought that was terroristic. I thought exploiting the land and going in and raping and exploiting and pillaging the land for an elitist group back in the home country, which is kind of what colonialism is based upon, I thought that was inappropriate. So that was all part of my initial philosophy that I carried through from my teenage years and even my adolescent years forward. So that brings us up to kind of how I was sort of introduced to other indigenous American cultures of the Southwest and northern Mexico, and then I went on to get more and more involved in integrating other indigenous cultures into my ideology, which we reinvested into our Ghost Dancer Church. So if you have any questions or comments on any of this information, we welcome your participation. And until next time, thank you for watching. If this hits a common chord with you, please feel free to contact us. And we're going to start maybe having some group discussion meetings once a week about some of this information on our Facebook site. So anyone that wants to participate, please email us, and we'll move forward with this if it has any interest to anybody. These are ancient wisdom teachings. We feel it's very important to get these teachings out there at this time. If there's no interest in them, if you're more interested in expediting your ego, creature appetites, ball games, chasing balls, getting drunk, what have you. I might say that our church eschews any kind of recreational drug use. My wife and I do not drink or smoke We're also vegans because we feel the spirit of the animal has been grossly disrespected. The animal nations have been decimated. The biodiversity of the planet is being diminished and exploited. The plant nations have been disrespected and deharmonized. There were when before in the 1800s there were 60 million bison, which is a very sacred thunder being to us, roaming the plains. It was in Choctaw. The word for bison is Yanish, and the word for earth is Yakome, and Ash is the past. It carries the past and the earth in its essence, the Yanish. So the bison, there were 60 million or more roaming the Great Plains. And within just about 10 years, those herds were systematically decimated and exterminated, and they came from 60 million to almost extinction in 10,000. Their bones were left to rot on the plains, just for the purpose of extermination. Part of it was to exterminate the Native American culture, because we honored the bison. It was a very important part of our being. So we interacted with that spirit nation, with that animal nation. It was a very important part of our ideology, our culture. And the Western European colonists, the settler colonists, they thought that was one way that they could decimate our culture and ethnocide us, if not genocide us, was by killing this animal nation that we were so closely aligned with. So they were decimated from 60 million within like a decade down to 10,000, almost to the point of extermination. So that's just one example of how the spirit of the animal has been disrespected by these postmodernist cultures. In any case, if you have any information or any interest in this, again, please feel free to contact us. And for now, Nanaya Hoshishinoashke, may you walk in peace. Yakoke, thank you. And Ayukpanchi, welcome to all. Moma Ayukpanchi, Moma Okla, all the people. Ilo Hitibapishima, we are all brothers and sisters. Thank you.